Imagine it's the middle of the night. The power suddenly goes out. Your heater stops, the room slowly turns cold, and the only thing you can find quickly is a small candle sitting in a drawer. You light it, just to see in the dark. A tiny flame flickers quietly, barely strong enough to light the room. Most people would think that candle is useless for warmth. But here's the strange part. If you place a simple clay flower pot over that candle in a very specific way, wait a few minutes and sit nearby, you'll start to feel something surprising. The air around you slowly begins to feel warmer. Not blazing hot like a furnace, but noticeably warmer than before. Enough that people who try it during cold nights often sit there thinking the same thing. How can one small candle and a cheap clay pot do this? And the even stranger question is why this trick keeps appearing online every winter, going viral for a few weeks, then disappearing again, like it never existed. Every year, new people discover it and react the same way, like they've uncovered some hidden survival secret. Tonight, I want to show you exactly what's happening with this simple setup, why it works, why people rely on it during power outages or expensive heating seasons, and why the internet seems to forget about it over and over again. Let's start with something most people never think about. A candle is not just a light source. A candle is actually a tiny heater. That little flame is constantly releasing heat energy. It may look small, but the flame temperature itself can reach hundreds of degrees. The problem is not that candles don't create heat. The real problem is that most of that heat escapes instantly before you can feel it. Heat naturally rises upward, so when a candle burns in open air, the warmth shoots straight up above the flame and spreads out quickly. Within seconds, the heat disappears into the room. That's why if you hold your hand directly above a candle, you'll feel a lot of warmth, but if you move your hand just a few inches to the side, suddenly you feel almost nothing. The heat is there, but it's escaping too fast to be useful. Now imagine someone noticing this a long time ago and thinking, what if we could capture that heat for a moment instead of letting it fly away instantly? Not trap it completely, because the candle still needs oxygen to burn, but guide it, slow it down, spread it out. That's where the clay pot enters the story. The kind of pot we're talking about is the most ordinary terracotta flower pot you see in garden stores everywhere. Nothing fancy, nothing high-tech, just baked clay. Clay has a very interesting property when it comes to heat. It absorbs heat slowly, stores that heat inside its structure, and then releases it gradually over time. If you've ever touched a brick wall that stayed warm after the sun went down, you've already experienced this effect. The wall absorbed heat all day and slowly gave it back later. The clay pot does something similar with the candle flame. When you place the pot upside down above the candle, leaving a small opening for air so the flame can breathe, the rising heat from the candle starts warming the inside surface of the pot. At first, nothing seems to happen. For the first couple of minutes, the pot is still cool, but gradually the clay begins absorbing the heat that would normally escape. Instead of flying straight upward and disappearing into the room, the heat moves into the clay. The pot slowly becomes warmer and warmer. Then something interesting happens next. Once the clay heats up, it begins releasing that stored warmth outward in every direction, not just upward like the flame, but sideways into the air around it. The pot itself becomes a warm surface that gently radiates heat. This is why people sitting nearby begin to feel that small pocket of warmth after a few minutes. Now it's important to understand what this trick is and what it is not. It is not creating new energy out of nowhere. The candle still produces the same amount of heat it always did. The clay pot simply spreads that heat more effectively instead of letting it escape instantly. Think of it like turning a flashlight into a lantern. The light was always there, but the lantern spreads it around more evenly. The clay pot spreads the candle's warmth in a similar way. This idea becomes especially interesting during certain situations. Imagine a winter storm where the electricity goes out for several hours. Suddenly, the heating system in your house stops working. The temperature slowly drops. You might still have blankets and warm clothing, but even a small extra heat source can make a difference if you're sitting in one place. Lighting a candle for light is already common during blackouts. Placing a clay pot over it to help radiate the heat more evenly is simply using that same flame more efficiently. People who have tried this during emergencies often describe it the same way. It doesn't turn your living room into summer, but it creates a small zone where the cold doesn't feel as harsh. Another reason people experiment with this trick is rising energy costs. In many places, heating bills during winter have become extremely expensive. When people start looking for ways to reduce energy use, simple ideas like this suddenly become fascinating. The thought that 2 cheap items from a hardware store might help create a small amount of warmth feels almost unbelievable. That sense of discovery is exactly why videos about this trick spread so quickly whenever someone posts one. But here's where the mystery deepens. Every time this trick goes viral, the same pattern happens. Millions of people watch it, thousands try it themselves. Then suddenly the conversation fades, posts disappear, videos stop circulating. Months later, someone new uploads a video about the same idea, and people react as if it's brand new again. It's like the internet has collective amnesia. Part of the reason for that is misunderstanding. Some viral videos exaggerate the results. They claim one candle can heat an entire room or replace a real heater. That's simply not true. When claims become unrealistic, platforms often remove or limit those videos. Then the whole topic fades away until someone explains it again more realistically. The truth is much simpler and actually more interesting. This trick is not about creating a miracle heater. It's about understanding how heat moves and how simple materials can change the way energy spreads. The deeper you look into it, the more you realize this idea isn't new at all. People have been using materials like clay, brick, and stone to manage heat for thousands of years. Traditional clay ovens hold warmth long after the fire burns out. Stone fireplaces radiate heat hours after the flames die down. Even ancient houses built from clay walls stay warm during cold nights because the walls store heat during the day and release it slowly later. The candle and clay pot trick is simply a miniature version of that same principle. When you see it that way, it stops feeling like a strange internet hack and starts looking more like forgotten common sense. In earlier times, people paid close attention to how heat behaved because staying warm was a daily challenge. Today, most of us rely on electric heaters and thermostats, so we rarely think about how warmth actually moves through a space. That's why this trick feels surprising when we first encounter it. There's also something else happening psychologically when people watch demonstrations of this idea. Humans love simple solutions. When a problem feels complicated, discovering that a very basic setup can improve the situation feels incredibly satisfying. A candle and a clay pot are objects almost anyone can find. No wires, no machines, no complicated instructions, just two everyday items arranged in a thoughtful way. But because we live in a world full of advanced technology, our brains sometimes assume useful solutions must also be complicated or expensive. When something extremely simple works, it feels almost suspicious at first. People wonder if it's fake or exaggerated. That skepticism is healthy, but it also adds to the cycle where the trick spreads, gets questioned, disappears, and eventually reappears again. Another interesting reason this idea keeps resurfacing is seasonal curiosity. During warmer months, hardly anyone searches for heating tricks. But the moment winter arrives and temperatures drop, millions of people start looking for ways to stay comfortable indoors. That's when someone inevitably posts the clay pot candle idea again, and suddenly a whole new audience sees it for the first time. Now, if someone decides to try this at home, safety should always be the first priority. A candle must always sit on a stable, heat-resistant surface like a ceramic plate or metal tray. The clay pot should never completely seal the flame because the candle needs oxygen to burn properly. There must be airflow, and just like any open flame, it should never be left unattended. These are simple precautions, but they matter. The goal is to use a small flame responsibly, not turn it into a risk. Once those basic precautions are respected, the setup becomes surprisingly straightforward. The candle burns steadily. The rising heat warms the clay pot. The clay stores that heat and releases it gradually into the surrounding air. Within several minutes, the outside of the pot feels warm to the touch, and the air around it becomes slightly more comfortable than the rest of the room. Sit nearby with a blanket, and suddenly that small warmth feels more meaningful than you expected. And that moment is usually when people smile and realize something important. The trick itself isn't magical. The magic is simply understanding how to use ordinary materials more thoughtfully. That idea applies far beyond candles and clay pots. Once you start noticing it, you begin seeing similar principles everywhere in everyday life. The way sunlight warms stone buildings during the day, the way thick ceramic mugs keep drinks hot longer than thin glass cups, the way brick ovens stay warm long after the fire is gone. All of these things rely on the same quiet concept. Certain materials hold heat and release it slowly. When people combine that property with a small, steady heat source, the result can feel surprisingly effective. That's why the candle and clay pot trick never truly disappears. Even if videos vanish and posts fade away, the idea itself keeps waiting to be rediscovered. Someone somewhere lights a candle on a cold night, places a clay pot over it out of curiosity, and notices the warmth spreading gently into the room. Then they share it online again, and thousands of people experience that same small moment of surprise. And maybe that's the real reason this trick fascinates people so much. It reminds us that useful knowledge doesn't always come from complicated technology or expensive equipment. Sometimes it comes from paying attention to simple things that have been around for centuries. A candle, a clay pot, a little understanding of how heat behaves, put them together thoughtfully, and suddenly an ordinary flame feels a lot more useful than it did a few minutes earlier. So the next time winter arrives and someone tells you a single candle can create a pocket of warmth when paired with a clay pot, you'll know exactly what's happening. Not a miracle, not a secret invention, just a clever use of materials that humans have understood for generations. And maybe the most interesting part is realizing how easily we forget these small ideas in a world full of complicated solutions. Sometimes the answers hiding in plain sight are the ones we overlook the most.